How does any community bounce back from economic disaster? The largest municipal government in history ever to declare bankruptcy. Welcome to Motown, in the epicenter of the Motor City Renaissance, right here on the Reinvention Chronicles. Once the fourth most populated city in America, a combination of factors, race riots, the decline of the automotive industry and other things, saw Detroit fall on hard times. Portrayed by images that I'm sure you've seen of abandoned buildings, rampant poverty, neighborhoods that resemble ghost towns. Heartbreaking for the Detroiters who actually lived here, because at one time the city symbolized the strengths and the virtues of things like industry, innovation, industriousness. And now, here in the downtown, the signs of recovery are everywhere, particularly when you consider things like the NHL Red Wings moving their new building right here to the downtown, along with the NBA's Detroit Pistons, who have come back from the suburbs. And then you've got, of course, baseball's Detroit Tigers, and the NFL Lions are over here to my left. And what you have is the largest city in North America, with all four of its major professional sports franchises located right here in the downtown. But pro sports is just the tip of a much bigger economic iceberg that looms here in Detroit, a financial and cultural comeback that continues to gain momentum after the city sank like the Titanic back in July of 2013, filing a Chapter 9 with civic debts totaling near the $20 billion mark.
We turn next to a big headline tonight out of America's iconic Motor City, Detroit, waving the white flag, the city filing for bankruptcy.
So how is Detroit bouncing back? Who's making this happen? And what are the underlying factors driving this Motor City Renaissance? A lot of what's happening right now in Motown is very similar to what unfolded back in Florence, Italy in the 14th century, more than 600 years ago, around 1350 to be specific, with the Italian Renaissance that started because Europe was coming out of a time known as the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages. People actually thought back then that life had to be hard. They had to live like peasants, go to war frequently, and be ravaged by diseases like the bubonic plague. But people in Florence began to think differently, and they began to think that maybe not everything had to be controlled by the monarchies or the church. You see, they started to think that people should be educated, that things like the arts, music, science, education could make life better for everyone. And it was the powerful Medici family, a collection of wealthy merchants and bankers, the uncrowned monarchs of Florence, who stepped up to the plate and started footing the bill. They were sponsoring artists, they were funding experiments in science and education, and what happened was a new spirit and level of competition started to flourish, and new heroes began to emerge. People like Da Vinci, Michelangelo, Galileo, Gutenberg, who later came along with the first printing press in 1440. And no different than the people in Florence, Italy, who were left to fend for themselves, the people here in Detroit have rekindled a new spirit of solidarity and entrepreneurship. Call it their own classic version of nuts, bolts, and a few loose screws, where the worlds of business and arts come together to spark this modern day renaissance. Motor City rapper Eminem, for example, has sponsored no fewer than 9 foundations that support social, cultural, educational, and youth initiatives. And then you've got business leaders like Dan Gilbert of Quicken Loans, Roger Penske stepping up to fund the Q Line. It's about a $180 million project, 3 miles of track through the downtown core, and it's really helping to spark a lot of downtown redevelopment with old buildings coming back, and all of this is being done as private capital sparks the revival. No government handouts and no transit authorities. You could say that people like Eminem, the real Slim Shady, Roger Penske, Dan Gilbert are like modern day Medicis. Instead of relying solely on government and the taxpayers to underwrite recovery, these are people who are actually willing to make down payments on the future, long-term futures, not just paying the fare for today's destination. And that's what happens when people with vision come together, when people from the business and the arts take matters into their own hands and create their own modern day renaissance. The soul of any great town or city is always found in the neighborhoods, but conversely, the heart of any great town or city comes from the downtown core, and it grows out from there. The challenge is recognizing how heart and soul always have to come together, how they have to literally walk hand in hand to create a new sense of spirit and identity where the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts. And while governments and municipalities can help foster an environment for a renaissance to occur, ultimately, it's up to the real leaders of any community to step up. The business leaders who need to back their beliefs with their own checkbooks, who need to be modern day Medicis and recognize their role and responsibility in being the spark plug that ignites new cultural fires and economic engines of growth and prosperity. Some thoughts to help you recreate and reimagine the company, the career, and the communities that you deserve.